when you're asking for help, you're acknowledging you need help. It'll only work, though, if you're doing all that you can do as well. And then a sort of certain magic is created. And then it will depend on your karma. Now, you've paved the way. It would be a good thing, may I say, if you're going to ask for help in prayer, I make an added suggestion, that before doing that, if possible, you send energy to others and then ask. Because you've got to be in the right karmic position to get help.
The Spiritual Freedom Show with Richard Lawrence, where politics is not the answer, materialism counts for nothing, and spirituality will set you free.
Richard.
Darren.
So today we have something a little different. So obviously, we talk about prayer a lot. We do it a lot.
We do.
I think we both appreciate, however, that there are a lot of kind of misconceptions or hangups that people can have about prayer, especially as it's conventionally portrayed or even performed by orthodox paths. So I wanted to escape the orthodoxy here. That's how I'd like to talk about
Escaping the orthodoxy is the name of my game.
And talk about prayer in the context of this question that came in, which was, can you pray to God for help? Which I think is a good question. But I thought we'd start maybe just a quick primer about prayer, the way that we think about it, the way that we do it versus, maybe traditionally understood and done. And then we can tackle this question that's come in here. Is there anything you'd like to say about, the way that we talk about prayer, what we mean when we say prayer?
Well, simply put, to us, prayer is the dispensation of spiritual energy. I think that's how it's put in the fourth freedom. And so is healing. Healing is another example of that. It's channeling energy through, and we've demonstrated it recently about the war, the Israel situation.
Go back to that one.
Yeah, but it's basically, allowing energy to flow through the palms of the hands and the heart center for others. And so that makes it very different and very much more practical and less academic, you might say, than some people's concepts of prayer. And what it isn't is just like a sort of Christmas gift list. May I have this? Could you give me that? Would you do that, please? Will you do the other? It's standing on your own 2 feet and doing something yourself. There's this wonderful aphorism by Dr. King that miracles are not performed by God for man, but by man for God.
Yeah, amazing thought to introduce to your consciousness, I think.
And he was always for standing on your own. It's one of his favourite sayings. My size 10, that's what I take, and I stand on them. And he would do that wherever he possibly could, and he didn't ask for help unless he absolutely had to. But there is nothing wrong, coming to the questioner, in asking for help from God, if it relates, especially if it relates to spiritual matters. If it relates to healing, if it relates to helping you for a spiritual reason, a part of your evolution, and you ask for help from God, which is your own higher self, actually, highest self, then that's perfectly all right, but it isn't enough. We have to make an effort as well. I think that's what I would add to it.
Yeah, actually, I think that brings me to, I think he called it the secret of personal prayer, Dr. George King, when he was talking about this. And I think the first step he described was this initial recognition of God. And maybe you can talk about, in the context of prayer, especially when you claim to be praying to God, why does that matter? I mean, what difference?
Well, first thing I'd say actually is that you don't have to use the word God. I think I want to make that clear. I mean, Mark Bennett and I wrote a book called Prayer Energy. He did most of the research for that book and found a number of prayers from many different traditions using different names and ways of appealing to God. And so those are just words.
Right.
It's above any word. It's above any one tradition. The great Ramakrishna parable about the 4 boys that are taken in for the first time. They've never seen an elephant.
Oh, yeah.
They're blindfolded.
Okay.
Each one touches a different part. They give 4 different descriptions. And he says, yes, but the elephant is the same. You just touch different parts. And he says that's what the religions do with God. That's great.
Amazing illustration.
Yeah, so that doesn't matter, but you should really be aiming when you pray, or we all should, to do some good for others. It will help you too, because that's karma, but you do it to help others, and you're sending energy out. So in the current war, if that's what you were focusing on, you don't prejudice it with any particular thoughts. Even you might have opinions. You might favor one side more than the other side. If you do, you put that aside completely and just become a channel, because love energy, as per the second freedom, is above mind in its higher sense. And so you want to have an unconditioned energy. The only thing you want to condition the energy with is love.
That's an interesting point you make there, because coming back to this recognition of God, I mean, it's fundamentally starting with this recognition of oneness, right? Which is the realization of yourself as one with all things and one God is. And so to recognize God is to recognize this interconnection, is to realize that love is the only answer, I guess, put it that way.
Yeah.
And so the oneness leads to this expression of love, which helps to condition our prayer and the energy.
And love, of course, is interpreted. So somebody might say all you need is love, but not really appreciate what love is, or they might appreciate what love is on a rather basic level, such as the personal relationship level. I'm not saying that's wrong, but it's above that. It's greater than that.
Yeah.
It may include that, and it may not include that. That will depend, but it's a way above that. And it's not conditioned by like or dislike. It's certainly not conditioned by attraction. You might want to send love to a source that you really are repelled by, if you stop to think about it, but you detach from that repulsion and you just send love to that source. One of the reasons, and we've spoken before about fighting the evil, just to go back to that for a second, is that you are then, when you fight the evil with love, with truth, with spiritual energy, with white light, with the violet flame, not with war, not with hate, with love. When you do that, and love is the transmuter of hate. It's in its basic manifestation. I think that's in the second freedom. When you do that, though, you also help the perpetrator of evil. You don't help them by just detaching from them and letting them carry on, and you stay in your peaceful state. You're not helping them at all. When you fight with light, which they don't want, you're helping them. So basically, coming back to recognition of God, I would say this actually. I want to be as generic and universal as possible. You might not believe in God at all, and you could still pray. That might sound very, very odd. You might not call it prayer then. Let's call it you could still transmit energies. You could believe in good, in goodness, if you like, in good thought. You could believe in love, and you could transmit energy to others. I do believe there'll come a point where you will start to believe in God. But bear in mind, some of the people some of the beliefs in God are so limited and so humanized. The God is some sort of bad-tempered.
It's better not to believe in that.
Yeah, they're so limited. I mean, and the whole point there is God is a galactic, super galactic, universal, cosmic intelligence, and more than that. You won't get a better definition of what God is than the 12th blessing delivered by the Master Jesus.
Yeah, I encourage everyone to study that.
It is the I am within man, it is the life within all things, it is the rain, it is the drought, it is the gentle breeze of summertime, it is the mighty wind across the seas, it is the seas, it is the emptiness of space, it is the fullness contained within space, it is all the world, it is ever and forever, it is infinity, and yet it is more than this, for it is behind even these things.
Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it?
I mean, talk about poetry. I mean, that's one aspect. It's very poetic work.
Yeah, as you say, that's one of those things you could go over and over and over and over and over again and mine.
And it is true. And I mean, I've experienced that to some degree. It is actually true. It is the I am within man.
I think that's kind of the essence of we're going here. This recognition of God is actually the recognition of your own God essence. And I think perhaps that's one of the reasons why it's
the key actually, because you're then no longer limited to your, if you take it far enough, your physical body.
Yeah.
And you can have. They used to talk about in here there's mention of cosmic consciousness and what that is, and I don't claim to have experienced that in the way it's described by Dr. King in here. I'm nowhere near that. But in the way it's described, say, by the wonderful Paramahansa Yogananda, yes, I can absolutely relate to that completely. But I'd say because of the knowledge we now have, it takes on a galactic format. It's a galactic awareness.
And you maybe we should go back to some previous shows to discover more about what Richard shared about those amazing experiences. I certainly recommend it. So in this case, so we're talking about recognition of God, recognition of our own God essence. I think that's like, believing in God is almost like believing in yourself in a way, isn't it? And then he talks about the second step about like this laying yourself bare, this honest confession to God. And I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about that step in this.
Well, what I would say, and this is something that I think we all need to be mindful of. I certainly do need to be mindful of this, and that's the vital importance of humility. And humility is very powerful in prayer.
Okay.
And, it's one of these strange paradoxes, and it's one of the paradoxes of truth. And, truth, this is from memory. I haven't got this on my pile of things here. But I think Dr. King once said, the paradox of truth is where the two opposite poles, and they can be very contradictory, meet. And where they meet, I think he says, realization is born. I'd have to get the exact quote. It's a brilliant concept, though, of these opposing poles. The great truths are always paradoxical, and yet when you really realize them, when you really perceive them, it's not a paradox. Those two paradoxes become one. And one of these is the fact that, as you rightly say, I am God, I am divine. I am also, though, a failing, flawed human being who's made mistakes, who has much to learn. Those two things are the paradox. This is where, by the way, the Greek philosophers, as I know them, which as far as I understand them, I'm not an expert at all, but I gather it's based on a mathematical deduction principle, are flawed. As mathematics, as we know, it is flawed. It's not necessarily wrong, but it's limited, and it can't conceive of, nor can our judicial system actually conceive of two opposing things being both true. And usually they probably aren't both true on the basic level, but on the higher level, they can be. So at the same time, I am divine. At the same time, I'm this flawed human being who's coming before God and confessing my faults, coming to your question. And that's very important. Confession is very important. It's not important so that you can be forgiven by God, as some traditional Orthodox people think, and you have all these people on their deathbed who suddenly either convert or confess and think, that's right, I'm now going to heaven because I said the right thing to the priest this morning. No, not that. But it is confessional to bare the soul. It's very good for us. And, I certainly experienced this, and I'm sure many others have. If we are open to intuition and open to our higher self, it's not always pleasant. If you start to recall past lives, by the way, it certainly isn't always pleasant. And, even whether you were famous or not is almost irrelevant. But if you do it properly, you'll recall the whole story. And if you do it honestly, it won't be very pleasant, which is why I think a lot of people can't remember. They don't remember. They're not ready to remember. And if they do come up with anything, it'll be some, great, I was Sir Isaac. I've told the story before, I was either Sir Isaac Newton or, some great famous figure, from history, Einstein, probably, I don't know. But these are the things people will come up with. Virgin Mary or Cleopatra, although that isn't a great thing to have been, but they think it is, etc. So this is a blockage. When one leaves oneself, though, really open, it's not always pleasant because you have to face yourself as you are and you have to face your faults as you are. You don't necessarily have to talk about them. You might find that if people can't really be trusted with that information because they don't understand it and they might even use it against you in certain cases. So I'm not suggesting that, but you yourself, you've got to know what you've done wrong, And you certainly can confess it to God. It's a bearing of the soul. It's a cleansing. You are really confessing it to your higher self. You're facing it.
Yes.
And that, I think, is what Dr. King's referring to there in his Secret of Prayer. Really facing up to your own failings and faults. And this clears the way, actually, to greater enlightenment. There's a wonderful saying by Mars Sector 6, and again, it's a paraphrase from memory, but let not the golden dove of humility leave your hands, fly away, or something like that, because it will leave you an ignorant fool.
Wow, that's a beautiful saying.
Yeah, and that golden dove of humility is something we all need to cherish and work on, and sometimes almost like force ourselves to face the truth about ourselves. You know, it can be, the spiritual experiences I've found are by and large, on the whole, really enjoyable if you're having them. But they're not always, and they're not always meant to be. And sometimes the difficult ones, which might be facing your own failings, can be by far the most valuable ones.
I absolutely agree. I mean, I think, you know, when a lot of people talk about praying to God for help, they don't often think about, what do I actually need to admit about myself, be honest with myself, my own higher self about, before, as you say, I can clear the way to make this, whatever change I'm talking about, possible. I think it's a brilliant insight, and you know... And
it's not easy. I'm not suggesting it is at all, to do that, to really face. And then, by the way, to be balanced, face your positives. And some people don't do that either. They play themselves down too much. And this is a point, again, that Dr. King often made. To overestimate yourself is definitely wrong. But so is to underestimate yourself. And you won't find more encouragement than you'll get from Mars Sector 6. And I would especially say, actually, the Master Aetherius. Extremely encouraging. If you come across his teachings, the way he talks is all designed. He talks to you as if he's just like telling you something you already know.
It is a bit like
you
that.
You can do this, and it's very and you can, and it's very empowering. I mean, there's a transmission actually by both of them, which is "Ye are gods." And so, don't underestimate yourself either. If you've done something worthy in the day or in your life, then don't say, "Oh, that was nothing." People actually who say it was nothing don't really mean it, by the way. Usually they want you to come back and say, "Oh, well, it was."
Kind of like a false humility.
Yes. But however, don't say that to yourself. Value yourself, yes, and many New Age teachers will focus on valuing yourself, and it is important. But so is the other side, admitting to yourself what you really have done wrong. If it really is wrong. I'm not talking about false guilt that's been put upon you to make you beat yourself up needlessly. No. But where you know, in your own inner conscience, in your own intuition, and those two are linked, and you won't go far with one without the other, then that's essential, for all of us.
Yeah, that's really... I think a fantastic building block then, because I think the next step he talks about is then building yourself up again, isn't it? So kind of in line with what you're describing here about, you know, the positive aspects, but appealing then to God for the strength, I suppose, the determination, the inspiration to make whatever change that you're talking about. That's not often talked about either, is it? I mean, people talk about praying to God as if God is going to do this change for you. But like you said, going back to that original quote in the beginning, it's not God doing miracles for man, it's us doing miracles for God. And so maybe we can talk about that. So it's when you pray to God for the strength, what is actually happening, I suppose, like maybe even like metaphysically or psychologically within you? I mean, what's going on?
Well, when you, first of all, just to make the request, I mean, this isn't quite what you're asking, but I'll answer it this way. If you send healing, as we do in the Aetherius Society, and we get names, and among those names there might be a name like John Smith. Now I don't know how many John Smiths there are, just picking one name at random. Might be one watching us now, but I mean, I don't know, but hi John. But you know, you could ask the question, well, how then will this energy get to the right John Smith, as if God needs a postcode. And it all has to do with a sort of magnetic connection from the very moment John or somebody with his approval asked for his name to go on the list, and a magic is started. So in the same way, this is an act of magic.
I see.
So when you're asking for help, you're first of all, you're acknowledging you need help. It'll only work, though, if you're doing all that you can do as well. And then a sort of certain magic is created. And then it will depend on your karma. Now, you've paved the way. It would be a good thing, may I say, if you're going to ask for help in prayer, I make an added suggestion, that before doing that, if possible, you send energy to others. And then ask. Because you've got to be in the right karmic position to get help. But then it'll all depend. You ask, how will that happen? That's an abstract question. It will all depend what kind of help you're asking for. But let's say you're asking for protection. Let's just say that. Then you're asking for help. You feel you're receiving some negative energies against you, some interference in your life, some people who are working against you, whatever it might be. And let's say you've put yourself in the right karmic position, you're doing everything you can. The help you might actually get won't be from God. God is all. It might be from a guide. And, I've had that myself. I've asked for help. I remember when I was first starting to develop my psychic powers. And I was in Switzerland, actually, and it was on the trip that I had my first experience of actually seeing a general in another realm. We've talked about it before. And on the same trip, while I was in the hotel, I did get some interference, and I asked for help. I did exactly what you've said. And what happened, because I could actually see it on this occasion, was a Native American on the other realms came in, someone known, I believe, to Dr. King, but came in, and basically said, because I could hear it, because I was at that stage, I was slightly unbalanced, I'm going to say, about psychic. I was so excited by it all. I was half on one realm and half on another a lot of the time, which I don't recommend. You need to get your feet firmly on the ground, I can say that. So I heard him, and what he said was, leave this boy alone. Actually, he went, leave this boy alone, like that.
Wow.
And it was almost, I was watching, I could see him come in, I had an idea who he was, but it was very quick. There was this entity, which wasn't the most powerful, I don't think, of interfering in some local entity. Anyway, the entity darted away, and it was almost like watching one of these cartoons, like he darted off, and this Native American didn't just leave it there. Well, he darted off as well. It was like watching, mouse and cat. He didn't just go and then okay, he's gone now. He went, and that was the end of that.
Wow.
But anyway, coming back to your question, that was a prayer for protection. If you were praying for your health, it could be most likely a healing guide that would answer that prayer, or be directed or guided by some force to help you.
I see.
And you might not know it, and you might think it's the Virgin Mary, and probably a lot of Orthodox people might, if they sensed it was a woman, think it was the Virgin Mary. Or they might just think it's God. They might not sense anything much, but they might still get healed. So that's probably how that would work. Or the help could come from a neighbour.
I see.
If you were stuck, somebody could be prompted by some force.
I'm sure people can think of examples of that.
So it could happen. The mechanics of it can be multivariate.
You mentioned something else, which is that you've got to actually be trying to make this change.
Absolutely, because you can't just, as people do, they kind of lean on God when a lot of atheists actually, or certainly agnostics, will turn to God when they're in a corner. And when suddenly pray. The entire time. And you're doing nothing about it. And so it will come down to your karma, because in the end we're responsible for everything we do. And we can't lean on anyone. You can't lean on a master. And by the way, a real genuine master can do exactly what you were describing that we're doing in that prayer. he can sort of break you down
and
build you up.
Yeah. He'll perform the whole thing.
Yeah, without controlling you at all. And I've seen Dr. King do that, and I've had an experience of it myself, where he was very critical with me for a long period when I was first working for him.
Yeah.
To the point where I thought, my gosh, I'm really letting him down. And then he took me out for a walk and really built me up. And I remember him saying to me, there's nothing I've done that you couldn't do. And and I've told this story before. But so that can happen through, if you're fortunate enough to follow a master. But even there, and I'm changing the topic slightly, but it's an interesting change, I hope. It's not enough to you shouldn't lean on God.
Absolutely.
Because you are God. You can call on a divine force. You're invoking a force, and it will manifest in some way, depending on your karma. And you could get miraculous help. Anything can happen. It could be a physical help. You could be, I don't know. This is where this sentence actually, from the 12 blessings, I've got to get this right. For it is written that man's extremity is thy opportunity.
Okay.
And I think that comes from an occasion. That's a prayer, by the way, that Dr. King wrote for the Master Jesus, and that line is in there.
Yeah.
From a case which I'm assuming Dr. King must have, because he wrote the prayer, have come across in his youth, of some people who were caught in a storm in a boat and prayed. And were saved from it.
Oh wow, I've never heard that.
So in that case, it could be a Divic thing.
Okay.
I think I've got the story right. Something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's where from man's extremity is God's opportunity comes from originally. That's why it says, for it is written that.
Wow, I had no idea it was based on. Wow.
Yeah. So, but you can look it up. It's a real thing. Yeah, absolutely. But also with a master, I had an absolutely eye-opening moment myself. When I was, I was a dedicated follower, and you could say colleague, because we worked together, and this would probably be in the early 90s, so towards the end of his life. I was in America, in Los Angeles, and I was virtually told at times to disagree with him if I really felt it was important, which I don't know if anybody else was. I simply don't know, but I was, both by him and also in a transmission through him. I had to tell him things even if it wasn't what he wanted to hear, which wasn't my favourite thing to do. Now, I'm not saying I always did it very well. But on one occasion, I was sitting with him, and I raised my glass to him, and it was just himself and his wife, Monique, who was a very close friend of mine, and myself. And we'd had an evening watching a film on television, the three of us, and I think we had brandy, a glass of brandy. And I raised the glass and I said, in a toast to him, and I said, it's a privilege to call myself your follower. And I'll never forget what he said. He looked at me and he said, you are not my follower. I thought, oh my God, what have I done? He said, you are my bishop and my friend.
Wow.
So by then he'd made me a bishop. And I learned a massive lesson. And because it's not what I need. It's not, it's quite comfortable to be a follower, actually. Now, that may not apply to many people, but what mattered was what he needed.
I see.
And I sort of changed my approach, and I've got to be a candid friend. And this is what he needs. And we had a wonderful, wonderful friendship between us, and became, well, I've said before, he even described me as one of his greatest friends, which is a wonderful thing. And he was certainly one of my greatest friends, no doubt about that whatsoever. But it was a lesson to me. And of course, he'd made me a bishop, so he wanted me to fulfill that. It just caused a reorientation. And I think why I mention that is in relation to our attitude to all higher beings, you might say, is yes, we can ask for things and we can follow God, but we should be, it comes back to actually miracles are not performed by God for man, but by man for God. What can we do for God? I've heard people chanting, literally singing, some evangelistic Christians, a sincere song calling on Jesus to come back.
I see.
Yeah. Come back to us, Jesus, Yeah. You could say that's heartfelt, it's devotional, but it's awful.
For him.
I'm going to say that. It's awful. Yes, why should he come? Look how he was treated last time. Don't ask him to come back.
I shouldn't think that way.
You know, and yet, you know, that would be regarded as devotional.
Yeah.
And so we've got to think another way. What can I do for the galaxy? What can I do for the galaxy? Most people say nothing. Most people probably don't even know the galaxy is a being.
Well, yeah.
But actually we can. Even praying for peace in the Middle East, to some degree helps the galaxy, because we're living in the galaxy's body. And we're contaminating that body with war.
Yeah.
So we can do something, and we should think about what can we do for God, not what God can do for us.
I think it's a beautiful way to end, because what are we praying for at the end of the day?
Yeah.
Are we praying to put ourselves in a better position to do that, which you described?
Yeah.
Or for the car, the house, whatever else?
Indeed.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you, Darren.
Hey everybody, it's Darren here. Thanks for tuning into the show. Now, if you enjoyed that episode, don't forget to subscribe for more wisdom from the 9 Freedoms. If you'd like to find out more about the 9 Freedoms, about Mars Sector 6, by Dr. George King, go to our website, that's aetherius.org. Richard and I love hearing from you, receiving your comments, your questions on your spiritual experiences, and talking about them on the show. So do write to us, share them with us at spiritualfreedom@richardlawrence.co.uk. Always remember that service is the jewel in the rock of attainment. See you next time.